Hello everyone, my name is Dr. Guillaume Lhermie and I'm the director of the Simpson Center, and I will be hosting today's webinar. Thank you all for joining us. The School of Public Policy is Canada's leading policy school known for our practical research. And remember that if you have to leave early, recordings of the webinars are posted on the School of Public Policy website, and you will receive a link in the follow-up email. Please type your questions in the Q&A box below, and we will pose them to our speakers if we have time during the Q&A portion of the discussion. So, today's panel discussion will be on Canadian agriculture regulatory systems, silos, and red tape. And this is my pleasure to welcome our two panelists, Dr. Larry Martin, Principal, Agri-Food Management Excellence, past professor and chair in the Department of Agricultural Economics and Business at the University of Guelph, past president of the George Morris Center, and member of the Canada's Agriculture Hall of Fame. Our second panelist is Yeung, Johnson Shoyama Graduate School of Public Policy at the University of Saskatchewan, MBA, International Business Consulting in Agri-Food Exports for Canada. Before letting the floor to our two panelists, I'm going to give a little context for this discussion. Canada's agriculture and agri-food export growth has been remarkable. Canada exports almost half its beef production, 75% of its wheat, and 90% of its canola production. About half of all its primary agriculture production and processed food products are exported to other markets. And today, Canada's biggest markets include India, China, and other countries in Southeast Asia, representing large opportunities for future growth. Over the last 10 years, Canada's agriculture and agri-food exports have more than doubled. And as this growth has occurred, Canada's technical expertise has shown higher crop yields, bigger weight livestock for inputs, zero disturbance seeding, and genome work on crop varieties have all resulted in developing Canada's sustainable export capability. Canada is a trading nation, exporting significantly above its weight class, and combined with exceptional export growth, Canada has enjoyed a reputation of safe, reliable agricultural products while honoring the rule of various trade agreements consistently. The export market growth story for Canada's agricultural products does, however, has some challenges. The response by government to emerging threats in food safety have, for example, resulted in additional cost and smaller margin for the producer, while the increase in safety is questioned. What builds a reputation as reliable and safe can become unnecessarily burdensome if not managed well. And our two speakers today have deep experience in agriculture, agri-foods governance and policy. They will be sharing their thoughts with us on the future growth potential of Canada's agri-food industry. And in particular, we are looking to our guests to discuss potential areas of red tape removal or improvement that could help kickstart the 2021 economic recovery by unburdening our agri-food system for some exceptional post-COVID growth. So, Larry and May, I would now like to turn the floor over to you for about 5 minutes each and to hear an introduction to your thoughts on Canada agri-food industry barriers to growth.
Okay, thank you very much. I'm going to bring up some notes here so I can make sure I stay on track. It's a great pleasure to be here and to be able to participate with the Simpson Center for me. So along the way somewhere, it was said that Canada punches above our weight in agri-food, and I take a little bit of exception to that. I think it's true from a population perspective, but I start from a different perspective. That is that Canada has huge potential to be one of the world's major food exporters to a hungry world that, at least until COVID-19, had increasing incomes that would allow them to pay for more and better food. And all we have to do is watch what's happened this year with the with exports to China to indicate that. We have the third largest endowment of arable land in the world after Kazakhstan and Australia. And on top of that, we have over 10% of the world's fresh water supply. So it seems to me that we should be punching pretty high with all of those resources. But our share of world trade in ag and food products is only about 4% and declining. Why is that? Dominic Barton did a report before the last federal election that asserted agriculture and food should be a major growth area for Canada. From my perspective, I thought that was the glorious rediscovery of the already well-known. But unless I've missed something, there has never been any follow-up to form a plan to develop that potential. If there was, I would have thought that there would be at least 6 areas in that plan. The sixth one is the one we're going to talk about the most here. Number one, we need to make sure we harness that water supply to use it effectively. We need to ensure a modern and efficient transportation system to move products and, through the ports, both bulk and container. We need to develop international trade policy that ensures that we have market access. We need to develop an agricultural policy that promotes innovation and competitiveness, which we do not have. And finally, we need to develop a regulatory system that promotes and rewards quality distinctions and is administered efficiently and consistently. When I was in the George Morris Center, we conducted several studies around Health Canada regulations and the like, and they concluded that our health and labeling systems are anything but efficient and consistent. So there were some major issues, and there's a plethora of these things, but I tried to come down to kind of the big picture things that I think are particularly important. Number one, we are among the slowest in the world to register new products in any area, whether it be animal health products, crop protection products, whether it be new food products or whatever. We are always among the slowest. And sometimes we're looking at the difference of 2 or 3 or 4 years. The implication of that is we are a small country. Many registrations are minor use for many companies. And so the long and expensive process means it's not economic to register in Canada. So we don't get some of the products, or we don't get to make some of the products. There are several examples that we ran into of ideas that were formed in Canada, but because of the slowness of the registration system, the businesses to exploit those ideas were built in the US or Europe or someplace else. So it's not very helpful. We're also inconsistent and arbitrary. And in this one, I have an example. I have a couple of examples, I think, that I can point to. A few years ago, I was working with a company in Edmonton that was building, I think, the first new food plant in Edmonton in I don't know how many years. And they were to the point where the plant was done. They wanted to actually get registered. They wanted to work with CFIA to make sure they were doing everything correctly. Unfortunately, Alberta didn't have a provincial director of CFIA, so they brought in the director from BC, who promptly told them how to set up their processes to make sure that they met the requirements. They spent the next 2 or 3 months actually doing that. Meanwhile, CFIA hired a new person in Alberta who came in and told them that they did it all wrong, that they had to do it differently. My other example is a labeling example. You'll know the name Miss Vicky. At the point of time that I was at Miss Vicky's, it was still owned by Vicky. And we were talking about her issues with labeling, and she had gone through 7 different iterations of new labels, all of which got rejected at about $10,000 which was a lot of money at that time for that small company. They got rejected, but nobody would tell her what she had to do. They would only tell her what she did wrong. And then she told me to turn around and look behind me, and there was a cupboard behind me that had 7 different packages of US made kettle cooked potato chips that she had bought in grocery stores in Ontario, which is where we happened to be at the time, none of which met any of the labeling requirements, including French and English. So we came to the conclusion that the job of the government agent that was in charge there was to put barriers in front of Miss Vicky. We see these all the time. So there's inconsistent and arbitrary administration, and to me, that's what really needs to change. And I think I've kept that to about 5 minutes, and so I'll wait until I'll allow May to take over now.
Well, thank you, Larry.
Thank you.
And again, I'm also very pleased to be speaking on behalf of the Simpson Center and partaking in this webinar. My points are also very similar to Larry's in the sense that a lot of the regulatory issues that we're now facing, whether it be domestic or international, is actually a case of, if you put it in a big basket, it's regulatory divergence, where the rules are one way, stated one way, but applied differently, or they're different in different markets. And one of the largest challenges globally for world food trade and agriculture is countries are moving away from the multilateral trading system, where everybody sort of agreed back post-World War II that we should have a rules-based system for trade. Because if you don't, it's the Wild West, and then nothing will be able to move or ship. So back then, countries agreed on a paradigm that we would try and work on a rules-based system to ship goods around the world. And since then, there's been an erosion of this paradigm to now we're at the point where countries are often going it alone, on which is their sovereign right. But it makes it very difficult in terms of predictability of what kind of rules and regulations anybody is facing when they're shipping. So that can be anything from a pesticide residue to what type of wash we're using on our beef exports, because one country will accept this chemical versus not this country. GMOs are another issue. If you're trying to increase your efficiency gains by using a GMO crop, you can't ship to Europe. There are all sorts of issues that are because rules are now unpredictable and people and countries are going on their own. So it makes it very difficult for a producer if you're trying to ship to one country and suddenly there's an opportunity in another, but you have to retool your entire production system to make sure that you can actually meet the rules in this different country. The cost becomes prohibitive and you just say, no, I'm not going to bother. And that's actually happened in the case of our beef exports. We had high hopes for beef exports to Europe because of the CETA, and they haven't materialized because tariffs were not the issue. The agreement reduced tariffs, but the agreement did not address any technical regulations, and those are the ones that are keeping our beef exports out of Europe. So there's this whole sort of domestic issues that Larry has spoken about regulatory divergence between provinces or between inspectors or departments. And then there's this whole international scenario of regulatory divergence, which is also affecting how we are able to ship products abroad.
So you basically agree to disagree. This is what I understand. Maybe what I catch when I hear both of you, that there is a problem of speed in the regulatory process, but there are also barriers. And so could you give us some examples on that, maybe both of you, because I think this is two parallel but a little bit different issues. So can you build a little bit on that?
Do you want to go first, Larry?
No, you go ahead.
Okay. Well,
I went
for
first
instance,
the last time. You can go now.
Oh, well, thank you very much. So for instance, it just, and I'm not besmirching any country's sovereign right to make decisions for their consumers, because that is the prerogative of every government, is to protect the health and welfare of their environment, the consumers, and their livestock and their wildlife and everything else. However, the EU has a stance, a very strong stance against GMOs, which is their prerogative. And they, within Europe themselves, they also have very entrenched disagreements on the status of GMOs. So even though an EU member, half of them have said it's okay, we can use GM, the others have said, no, we're not going to. So they have not been able to reconcile this issue, and it's been more than a decade. And the whole issue of innovation and that kind of development has ground to a halt in Europe. But one of the practical problems of this was when they actually established the strictness of this rule. I'll give you, this is directly impacting Canadians. One of our largest, Canada's largest export market for flax was Europe. And back in 2009, if not slightly earlier, there was an incident where the University of Saskatchewan had developed a type of seed that was resistant to a type of pesticide, but then they realized the pesticide was discontinued, so they stopped the research on the seeds and they burned the stalk. And this flax was called triphid flax. And they destroyed all the research, they destroyed all the seed stock, there was nothing left. And then a few years later, I'm not sure of the timeline, however, I think, and whether they found 7 flax seeds or 8 flax seeds in the rail shipment that went to Europe, set off an entire food safety alarm system, even though the flax shipment was actually destined for linoleum and paint. It wasn't meant for the human food chain. So these 7 seeds, however many there were, very, very small number of seeds were found, and the European system basically effectively shut out Canadian flax for 3 years, decimated our Canadian flax industry. And from then on, to reopen the market, there was the Canadian government and the Europeans instituted a highly rigorous testing program where basically, and I am, making this up a little bit, but basically as the farmer delivers it to the grain terminal, it gets tested. From the terminal, as it gets loaded onto the train, it gets tested. Every 5 train cars get tested. From the train cars to the ship, it gets tested. Once it gets onto the ship, it gets tested. And then from the ship, when it leaves Canada and arrives in the EU, it gets tested again. And per test, it's about $100 a pop. So this is the extent of some of the regulations the hoops that have to be jumped through because of the regulations in Europe. Their anti-GMO stance also effectively precluded their own livestock industry from being able to feed their livestock. They couldn't grow enough to feed their entire livestock industry in Europe. They need to import, but because of the very strict rules against GMOs, it basically precluded most of the largest producers of feed grains, from shipping to Europe. So their own livestock producers actually had to lobby on behalf of their industry, which was collapsing, to say, please loosen the rules up enough so that we can actually import feed to feed our industry. And they finally did. And this is, again, not meant for the human food chain. This is just for animal feed. And they finally agreed and relented enough to be able to provide enough feed for their livestock. So go ahead.
And now the Mexicans are doing the same thing.
Yes, and it's spreading everywhere. So how do you, okay, well, if you want to grow a GM crop, so if you're a barley producer and you wanted to perhaps, expand your yields or have something that might help you against a particular pest, if it's a GM of any sort, you're thinking you're going to export to Europe, you better not do it because you won't be able to do it. And even if it's an accidental contaminant, that came across the field and it gets caught in the testing system, it'll close your industry for 3, 5, whoever knows, however long, and wipe your industry out. So it's so strict and very difficult to actually manage that kind of risk, because the flax industry, it wasn't even meant for the food chain. It was meant for paint and linoleum, and it still wiped them out. So, and I don't think they've ever fully recovered.
Okay, thank you, May, for this explanation. So Larry, maybe can you tell us about what is so slow in the regulatory processes? Do you have any example of that?
Well, it gets slow because people lose data that were submitted by the company who wants to register a product, or they look at the data for a while and then they decide that they need to have more tests done, more replications done, or some of the data might be a test from another country, but we decided we can't accept the test from another country. This isn't an agricultural example, but one of my favorites is a company had wanted to register a product that would protect dogs from heartworms, which is a fairly major product or problem. and the company had the active ingredient registered in Germany, and they had done efficacy tests using German dogs. And Health Canada decided that we had to do these tests again using Canadian dogs. I can understand sometimes there are some circumstances when maybe genetics, or particularly in some cases climate, would be different, than you might have to have replications. But heartworms in dogs, I don't think so. And that was an indication of just the kind of the arbitrariness of it. And so I can't remember the numbers exactly, but the first one we did, I think I'm gonna be close at least. You went through a whole series of products that were attempted to be registered in different countries. Australia came out the fastest. This was animal health products. They had 90 to 95% of decisions made within 2 years. Okay, Canada's average, not 90 to 95%, was over 5 years. Okay, so if you're a company, again, looking at the fact that we're a small country and you're probably a minor use, you're probably asking for registration for minor use, and you are sent back and sent back and sent back to get more data and more data. And oh, I forgot and I lost it. Or I got a new person who's working. We don't have consistency in the people who are making the decisions, so they change, and so that we have to go back and fill them in, the new people in, and all this sort of thing. And eventually you get to the point where you say, well, why do this? Because we're not going to be able to sell enough in this country to make it worthwhile, and we're sure as hell not going to do any research in this country. And we're not having very much research done in this country.
No.
I see. So maybe before going to policy recommendations, because I'm sure you have, I have some questions in the chat, and maybe I can take this one for May. So can you discuss the non-tariff trade barriers that arise with different countries? Example, Italy and Durham wheat, which is actually more of a political issue versus a trade issue.
Well, yes, of course. The issue that's now arising is because non-tariff barriers are actually, traditionally, non-tariff barriers they have a legitimate domestic purpose in your home country. So for instance, we have to wear seatbelts in Canada, or we have to have French and English labeling. That's not meant to be a barrier for somebody shipping a product into Canada. That's just because we believe as Canadians that we should have French and English because of our policy and dual language. But that can become a barrier for, say, if you're an exporter of chocolate from Ghana and you're trying to learn French, and you have to make sure your label's correct. It's just a time and hassle cost barrier for producers to have to meet these rules, but it's a legitimate rule. So non-tariff barriers are quite complicated because they usually have a domestic legitimacy that you can't question. So in that sense, it makes it difficult to address them. But also what's happening lately is that they're now being used as a political tool, as a large stick to sort of achieve political ends. So if you see what Australia is suffering through at the hands of China right now, and they're saying, well, you have a residue on your wine that's not allowed, and suddenly they've lost their largest market from wine and beef and coal and steel and whatever else that the Chinese have decided to say there's a residue. And even our domestic, my brain just stopped, our pulse guys who are shipping to China and soy and pork, well, suddenly, oh, you have a different residue on your pork that's not allowed, and you've exceeded the labeling. And that wasn't really the case, but it was a good excuse that they used to legitimize a political goal. So this is occurring more and more, not just in China. It's happening everywhere. And we don't know, that whole idea of trying to have a trade system that works so that we actually feed ourselves is starting to fall apart. And that's very, very dangerous. So if you think of if you have a perishable good, and you're shipping it, like the Australians were shipping lobster to China and they just said no when it sat on the tarmac and rotted. You know, if you have an extra residue limit that's legal in Canada or legal in the US and you shipped it to South Korea or Taiwan, who've just decided to reduce their pesticide limits on foods, those shipments get stuck waiting, and cherries and fresh fruit and any horticultural product do not have a long shelf life. You think it's just sheer wastage alone, never mind the cost of shipping, transporting, storing, waiting for testing, waiting for certification, and then being released by customs. I mean, that's days and days and days and days if you're lucky. So this is becoming a real issue, and not whether or not there actually was a residue or they're just saying there's a residue is becoming very difficult to manage. And yeah, I don't know why or how we come back to convergence versus divergence in these policies.
Can I just add a little bit to this?
Sure.
I think what you're describing was totally predictable. In fact, I remember as we were going through the various rounds of the WTO when we were reducing tariffs and that sort of thing, I said, okay, here's what's going to happen. The tariff barriers are coming down. Now what's going to happen is the non-tariff barriers are going to go up because the pressure on politicians everywhere will be to do something to limit trade, and what's happened is exactly what I expected to have happen. And I don't see the WTO or anyone actually taking hold of it and saying, you know, we need to start addressing this. They basically kind of buried their head in the sand and said, well, we're not going to deal with this.
And I think too, like the WTO is a voluntary organization, right? It's like the WHO. So when Trump came in and decided, well, you guys are garbage, what recourse did they actually have? So they're just trying to keep functioning in an environment that's decided that they're not necessary. Absolutely. But the issue is that people don't remember what it was like before the WTO, and they don't realize that the depression and starvation and food nationalism did not work. That's what led to World War II. And, you know, so, but people have short memories and nobody remembers this. And they're hamstrung because they're funded by, it's a voluntary organization that's funded by all its member governments. And if one member decides not to abide by the rules, then what do you do, right? It's a gentleman's club in that sense, where people agreed to agree or agreed to try and work together. When people and governments decide not to work together, then what do you do? Yeah. And I hope it doesn't come to the fact where where nothing functions and it's so dysfunctional that you realize, oh, that we get pushed to the brink where so much food is wasted and so many countries are starving and there is no supply. Then do they decide to start working together again?
So maybe you touched a little bit our US neighbors, and so I'm sure that you are aware that the US has a new president, of course. And so I wanted to ask you what you think about this new Biden presidency. Would it be favorable for Canada's agri market, or maybe even more rude than what it has been with the Trump administration?
Yeah,
I think it's all much better because you're predictable. Predictability is what markets like. Whether or not his policies depends on his policies on climate change and environmentalism and where he decides to apply them and how severe. So if you look at Keystone XL, I mean, first decision because he campaigned on green. So I think one of the other issues that is looming over agriculture is we've seen what happens to oil shipments in the oil industry has become the whipping boy for climate change. If the social media mob sort of flash issues decide to focus on agriculture, that can be a real threat as well for shipments and growing and everything else. You're dealing with a general public that may or may not understand all aspects of agriculture or how important agriculture is. They take it for granted because I get my quinoa toast with avocado every morning. I don't realize that it comes how far because if you look outside right now where I am, we've got 15 centimeters of snow. And I don't remember the last time I saw an avocado tree in Canada or the US, but how did that avocado actually get here? Most people aren't aware of this. So I think agriculture has to be careful in terms of their vulnerability to the whims of social media and the cause movement. It can be a dangerous threat, I think, and there should be some proactive, positive marketing about what actually happens in the ag industry.
Maybe, Larry, do you share these thoughts, or do you have any?
Oh, yeah. I mean, May actually said the words that I've been saying quite a bit about the new U.S. administration, which is that I think everything's going to be more predictable, but you're not going to like what you're predicting in a lot of cases. Because I mean, look what he's just done with with purchasing by governments, which is, on the surface at least, it's totally antithetical to the North American Free Trade Agreement. I think you're going to see a lot of protectionism, but it will be more stable. And I'm not trying to say that I support Trump, because I do not in any way, shape, or form support Trump. But I don't think we're going to see a lot better. The Wild West part will probably go away. It'll be less arbitrary and that sort of thing than it has been, but it's still going to be anti-trade.
Okay, thank you. So maybe let's go back to internal or national affairs. And so, Larry, you have actually a question from George Moyes graduate. He's happy to see you again.
Yes, I saw that.
And so the question is, what role should the government play in investing into Canada's agriculture value-added sector, and where does our government's investment level rank relative to countries with a similar net export position?
I'm not sure I have a great answer for that, but by the way, good to hear from you again, Rob. I don't know the last time we've actually talked to each other, but it's great to hear from you. I made the comment that our agricultural policy was not particularly helpful, and I know I'm overstating the case when I say it the way I say it, but basically most of our agricultural policy is around business risk management, and it basically pays farmers to lose money and requires them to do nothing particularly with the checks that get written. And a lot of other countries are doing things a lot differently by having, in our case, it could be the round tables that we have who get together as a vertical sector and say, what are the things we need to do to improve our competitiveness? And that's where if you're going to do these things, then you can qualify for some government investment. I worked with the greenhouse industry a few years ago, and I mean, both Holland and Denmark are doing a lot of that with that industry. So to me, that makes a lot more sense as a way to invest in the industry. I don't know. I haven't thought through the question of how far the role should be and how much they should be investing. I really get worried about picking and choosing. That's one of the things I see with a lot of government programs. One company gets in the investment, the other company does not. And therefore, I've actually seen several companies say, we're not going to do something because the government's supporting our competitor over here, and we're not going to mess with it. So you got to get the balance right. And I don't have an answer for how how to come up with that balance. I haven't thought through it yet, I guess. And I don't know the answer to the question about how we rank relative to other countries, but I think we would not rank very high, but I'm not sure about that. Yeah. So that's kind of a half an answer to your question, Rob, I hope.
Yeah, it's already a good half, I would say. Maybe May, you can take this one. So there is one question in the context of regulatory approvals, as highlighted by the difference between Australia and Canada. What specifically makes their timelines so much better? Service standards, political will, or something else?
I think they have what Larry says we do not. They came together with an actual agricultural growth innovation policy, and they actually enacted on it. They've actually thought through how to innovate and support innovation across the board, predictably, without bias, and in target industries that they thought they had a good shot at developing well. And they follow through with money and support and research, and made research, approval times are faster, it's more efficient. They identified what were the downfalls to innovation and business development growth, and they addressed them. Whereas we say, well, we'd like to grow, and then we don't do anything.
Yeah.
So they actually have an active, aware, and engaged agri-food innovation growth development policy that's national. And they're doing very well with it.
As Guillaume, you know that we keep finding that how many things we agree on, despite the fact that we never met each other before 2 weeks ago.
Yeah.
And I love that answer. But another part of it is, I'll use this example. In one of our studies that we did about health regulations and that sort of thing, where again, Canada came out really, really badly behind, I think it was the EU in this particular case. I said, I said to my research assistant, what are the objectives of the EU policy or whoever country it was? And what are the objectives of the Canadian policy, or the legislation? So she went and looked, and she came back with, here are the objectives of the EU legislation. There aren't any in the Canadian.
Yeah.
There are no objectives. So there's nothing to guide administrators.
No benchmarks.
There's no benchmarks. There's nothing to hold anyone accountable. And so it's like trying to pick up water. It really is. It runs between your fingers because there's no structure there.
But yet they say that, this is a priority industry and it has so much potential, which it does.
Yes.
There's no sort of, and that's the role of government, is actually to help foster and incubate and facilitate that kind of growth and economic development and business development. But we don't have any active policy that actually guides or facilitates or enables or fosters. It's just, okay, it's important, we should do this.
So what do we need? So tell us now, what do we need?
Larry?
Well, I'm looking at, I assume this is probably Ted Menzies' question. And I think my response to that fits. I'm not going to give you all the answers because I'm not that smart. But the question he's written is, you have explained the issues with CFI, PMRA, and so forth. How do we as industry players get the attention required? The first thing we have to do is get together. Work together, collaboratively. I tried so many times when I was still at the George Moore Center to get a coalition of trade associations together, because if you look at it, everybody's facing the same thing. But there are different parts of Health Canada that are responsible for animal health, and there are different parts that are responsible for plant health and so forth. And each of the trade associations looks at their part. They don't look at the others. They don't understand. They don't want to understand that we have the problem across the whole country, number one. And number two, they're all competing with each other for memberships. So they don't want to give up anything to anybody else by cooperating with anybody else. I'm sorry. I'm sure there are trade association people on here who don't want me to say that, but I'm saying it. And so until the agri-food sector gets together, and the food companies will actually work with those nasty people that make Roundup and things like that, and come together to say, this is what we need, this is the framework we need, we're not going to get anywhere.
Yeah.
So I think it's both things. I mean, it's both things. We need clarity in what we're trying to accomplish, which May said better than me a few minutes ago in terms of what the other countries are doing. And we also need the agri-food sector to get together and say, this is what we need.
Yeah.
And I didn't say this in my opening part. I don't want anyone to think that what I'm suggesting is that we have sloppy regulations. I think it has to be. I like to use the term fast but tough. We need to have regulations that cause our quality to be as high as possible, or at least gives us the opportunity to distinguish qualities, but we need to make decisions quickly.
Faster.
And I would never ever say we should not have good regulation. That's the last thing I would say. But
how could we encourage that? So having faster regulation. So because the first thing that I hear is working together, like the people from the ag sector.
Yeah.
I think a lot of the issue too is, if you think about what happens, is you need a critical mass. The squeaky wheel gets the oil, right? So, you know, the pulse producers or the horticultural guys, everybody has their own little thing. But if you all gang together, you have a much more cohesive and attention-getting voice in Ottawa, which is what you need. So the beef guys and the pork guys and everybody, I mean, you all have every ag export industry, anybody need to work together. And we actually do have coalitions that try and do this, but you need a louder voice. And we do, the Canadian Agri-Food CAFTA tries to get attention, but it's almost like you need more from the grassroots as well for everybody to work together to actually get attention, because it is a lot. The government system is a lot like the Titanic. It takes a long time to turn, and you need a lot of oomph from the back to get everybody to pull forward. And I think that what Larry said, I mean, we need, our Canada's brand is actually safe, right? We are known for food safety. So let's keep that, because we need our regulations, and that's part of our branding and part of our competitive edge. But let's just make it happen a little bit faster, and also foster innovation and research. I mean, there's so many ideas out there, but we tend to just say, it's too hard, and it is too hard. So there needs to be a way of measuring what makes it hard. Is it because you have 7 regulations on the labeling of beef, or 18 before you're allowed to package your pack of chips? And then they change every 6 months, so that becomes 18 becomes 45. That is just too cost prohibitive. It's not going to happen. So we need to streamline and mark and the nitpicky thing of labeling barriers and labeling all the things that are causing slowdowns and disharmony within the regulatory system, to try and pinpoint where is it slowing down, and come up with a system whereas perhaps you can predict how your regulations will flow in a systematic way, and it's predictable, and there's timelines, and it's not just sort of, well, it could be 6 months or it could be 4 weeks. We don't know, right? That kind of risk businesses don't like.
So there's the first time I've disagreed with her. She said it needs to be a little faster. It needs to be a lot faster.
Finally, there is something.
But I think if you talk to anybody who works in agriculture and looks at the issues, you're going to find this kind of underlying theme facing the Canadian agricultural system. We're all looking at it all the time, and we see it, but we don't, how do you pull it together to fix it?
And so I need a warm glow. So is there any
microbrewery
active policies or something that in the agriculture sector or in another sector that we could get inspired in the agriculture sector? So how to push that? So what has been successful in the past in Canada, and that we can in some sense try to use in the ag sector?
I'm sorry, I didn't catch the question.
Yeah, so I was thinking that we have seen so one of the biggest challenge that you have emphasized is that the ag sector is not working together enough. And so is there any other sector that has done that? And What does it lead to? Yeah, and so can we get inspired from these sectors and try to do the same thing in the ag sector?
Well, I think one of the recent, well, not so recent, but definitely gives us a competitive edge in terms of exporting in the last, I don't know, 5-10 years or so. And it's been an industry-led initiative, was actually instituting really comprehensive traceability, particularly in meat. So that actually opened up our beef and pork exports to Asia, South Korea, Japan, Taiwan, particularly, to the point where a consumer in Japan could scan the QR code on the cut of beef that they're buying from Canada. And I mean, and if they scan the QR code, they get the story of Betsy the cow, and you know, she got to frolic so many days in the field and ate dandelions and got this many hours of sunshine and had a really good quality of life. And the Japanese consumer is willing to pay for that story and that kind of traceability back to the individual farmer. So we actually have that kind of traceability in those markets, and we've actually been able to. That's been you earn a premium for that kind of beef, and it also has brought greater returns for our producers who are being able to do that. So that expanded our beef trade to Asia particularly. So that's been a great success story, and that's one of our competitive edges in terms of meat anyways. So there are bonuses, right?
That's reassuring.
Yeah.
There's actually I assume they're still there, but there's a lamb operation in France or Germany or someplace that you can actually watch. You can watch the pasture on a television screen and pick out the lamb that you want to have butchered for your meat, which I think is kind of an oxymoron, but but it's the same idea. You can go watch them frolicking and so forth in the pasture, and that's the one I would like on my table.
And I think as consumers become more sophisticated in what they're looking for, and that consumers' tastes are changing so rapidly, that if that's an example of where the industry jumped onto an opportunity and instituted change to actually meet the needs of the consumer. So that was doable and reasonable. There's been a big change in terms of consumers who are looking for veganism and vegetarianism in their lifestyles. And I know the pulse industry, as a way of growing, has actually now focused, one of their largest growth areas is plant protein, right? Yep. To supply plant protein for the vegetarian and vegan world out there. So separating out, and then you get the value-added processing, because they're doing it at home rather than shipping out the raw commodity. And you get higher margins, it's growth, and that trend is not going away. If you look at India, I mean, pulses are their largest diet staple, and they are a net importer. They cannot grow, they're trying, but they cannot grow it sufficiently to feed themselves, so they have to import. And despite, they put on an import tax on all forms of imported pulses, because they were trying to encourage their domestic farmers to grow, but they still imported, and they reduced the tariff to bring in enough imports. So, that is a nice growth area, because again, they saw the consumer trends, and also in pet food, right? Like how many, pea protein in your dog food. Yeah. That's also another value-added way of extracting greater processing from a commodity rather than just shipping out the raw material. So sorry, go ahead.
That fits in. I see Peter Bulkowski has asked a question. I'm not sure it's a regulatory question particularly, but he's basically saying that the environmental movement's attacking the beef industry, especially, and meat industry in general, and he's not sure that the ag industry has a clue about what's about to hit it. I just read yesterday or this morning, one of the two, that one of the fake meat companies is about to lower their prices for simulated ground meat by 20%, and they are aiming to undercut the price of ground beef pretty quickly. And I think a lot of people do have some idea about what's about to hit it, and I think it's going to be really hard when it gets hit, but it's coming for sure. I don't see that there's a lot of regulatory stuff in there other than, you know, one more thing to help the meat industry would be to keep the regulatory costs as low as possible, so so they can compete. But yeah, anyway, I thought that fit nicely when you brought it up, May, with what Peter had asked there.
Well, and the other thing that I think, and I've been sort of beating this issue for quite a while, is there's an issue with consumers out there. I mean, I'm a city girl. I don't know how I ended up doing so much in food and ag, which is rural, but I'm a city girl, and I know because of my work, I've been to the farmer market, and I've seen packages of red spring wheat being sold in a little mason jar. And they're selling it as organic, local, blah blah blah, oat, da da da, and I can't remember what it was specifically, but I know it was red spring wheat, and they labeled it incorrectly, and they were selling it for $20 for a little jar like this.
And they also must have said it was non-GMO.
Of course, and you know, gluten-free and all that stuff too. So there's this movement out there amongst consumers, and because of the ability to cause in social media, there is an issue for agriculture that I think it needs to be far more proactive in building goodwill and building awareness about what it does, because it's so vulnerable to these kind of misperceptions and misinformation that's out there, and it's so easy to spread. You know, pesticide residues, all pesticides are bad, but they don't realize that without it, we'd all be starving. I mean, if we didn't have the green revolution that actually, you know, quadrupled productivity, we'd all be starving. And we still need to grow enough food by 2050 for 10 billion more mouths. If we don't come up with the innovations to do this, this is not going to be a promising thing. And, you know, avocado toast is going to be the least of your worries. But consumers have no idea, right? Like, and so there needs to be a lot more sort of proactive marketing, awareness building, and counteract misinformation out there.
So this is the mission of the Simpson Center, and we hope we will do that. And we need people that are enthusiastic like you are to do that. Maybe going back, and of course this consumer issue or consumer challenge is a real challenge. Maybe going back to today's topic, there is a question regarding. So are there within Canada interprovincial barriers for agricultural products beyond beer and wine? So we go back to problems, and maybe we can afterwards you can tell us how we can solve these problems, if so.
So the question is the interprovincial trade barriers?
Yeah.
Oh yeah. Oh, there's lots of them.
Yeah.
I'm not sure it's still in existence, but I know it. I know one of them is you can sell raw milk cheese in Ontario, but you can't make it.
And you can't ship Quebec. We can't get Quebec produced cheese in Alberta.
Yeah, we can, but we can't make it ourselves.
Yeah.
So there's one. It used to be that Ontario's butter was yellow and Quebec's was white. Or vice versa.
Yeah, you had to have a different colorant.
Yeah, so you had to have different coloring.
Because you had to differentiate between Ontario and Quebec.
Yeah, there's squillions of these things. I having spent a little bit of time in the EU, I think there's more trade barriers between provinces in Canada than there are between countries in the EU.
Yeah. Except for maybe the exception of the UK now. They're pretty messed up.
The UK is not in the EU last time I checked.
I know, right? Oh, well, what have we done?
Not yet. Maybe it will take a couple of years.
I don't know. There are so many levels of barriers.
Yeah,
it's just,
for sure.
Doesn't make sense, but it does. They do.
Yeah, and you basically, somebody's asked this question, and fundamentally what we're describing is a country that has not expressed or come up with the political will to make it better. Until we do that, nothing's going to happen. And until we get the industry together to put pressure on politicians, it's not going to happen. And I go back to the same thing, which is we need to get this industry together and to get to a point where at least we can talk about the things that are regulatory barriers that kind of affect everybody, and come up with some policies about how to make them consistent. And I mean, we've talked about lots of pieces of it. That's part of the problem too, is that this is not a simple area. I always have trouble talking about it because there are so many facets of it, even just getting your mind around it. And that's why in my opening comments, I tried to keep it at a really high level. We're slow, we're not consistent. You know, we start there, you can find a million examples of why or reasons why we're slow and inconsistent. But it's a really hard thing to get your mind around. And you know, sometimes people, I actually sat on a panel that Ag Canada had one time trying to get rid of some of the stupid regulatory things in the horticulture, the canned and frozen fruit and vegetable industry. And there were things in there that I just couldn't believe. And the regulatory things were there because one company wanted a different can size than everybody else had. Mm-hmm. And everybody else didn't want that company to do it because they might have an advantage. You know, there were so many things like that. So you've also got the competitive pressures that are out there in the marketplace, where somebody wants a particular regulation because it protects them from their Canadian competitor, let alone their American competitor, or vice versa. So it is not a simple thing, but I think if you stand back and look at it as a big picture thing, it's costing us a lot. It really is, and we got to get past some of this stuff and get together.
A few years ago, I did a project for one of the industry associations, who shall remain unnamed, and they actually came up with a 5-year measurement tool to see if they were making any progress in their lobbying efforts to reduce regulatory red tape. And we came up with a manual that had, we selected indicators of regulatory things that were holding up progress, or that their producers found very difficult to manage, or took too long, or were unpredictable. So within those parameters, we found these Canadian regs per parameter, per indicator, and timelined it. And so then within every year, they tasked somebody within the industry org to sit there and see, okay, have we gotten better? So every year we have to apply for this permit. Has it taken us longer this year? Is it faster? Is it better? So they could actually benchmark progress on their lobbying efforts to reduce regulatory headaches. So once we did the template, I don't know what happened to it, and I don't know if there's actually been an improvement, but this was an effort by an industry organization to actually note and measure and then benchmark and mark progress on reducing red tape. So that, you know, there's got to be a way of, you know, identifying, measuring, and then watching progress and benchmarking. But that doing up that template gave them a means to actually mark their progress. And something like that per industry association, or per, you know, grains council, or meat guys, or processors, or all together, because everybody's got different indicators. But perhaps there could be some sort of means of at least for their own industry or your own sector, to see what's happening and is it getting better, and then, you know, redouble your lobbying efforts to address the issue.
That's a really nice recommendation. Maybe one last recommendation could also come from Larry, and it can come as an answer to a question. So one people raised the question of infrastructure. We have not discussed rail and ports, and so what is the issue with that? So we didn't discuss that. What are your opinions on that? And maybe it will be the last question that we will be able to take today.
Okay, say again. What are my opinions on
rail and infrastructure and port?
Rail and ports.
Rail import, shipping the stuff.
Oh, I saw that. Yes.
Yeah, we didn't talk about that.
Yeah, I'm not going to pretend to know to say that I know a lot about that.
You have 1 minute,
But
so that will be enough.
my fundamental perception is that we're still, for the agricultural sector, we still have a regulatory system on rail rates that we did as a result of the Crow rate, and we changed it and put a regulatory system. We changed it once in '74, and then we changed it again a few years ago, and we've still got limits on how much you can charge for shipping some products, but you don't have limits on others. So are we surprised that railroads want to ship coal when there's no limit on what they can charge for shipping coal, but they don't want to ship wheat because there are limits on what they can charge for it? To me, that's just I understand why they did it and so forth, but to me, it's just backward. If you want to have a transportation system that works really well, you got to have the incentives there to put the right thing in place. As far as I can tell, and again, I'm not going to say that I know very much about this because I'm an Easterner, but we still got kind of the same transportation system in Western Canada that we had in 1898, and we've kind of put it in place to stay like that. And did we ever think maybe just maybe we could actually ship more out of Western Canada than that transportation system was built for? I don't think so. So to me, I think it's one of, I said at the beginning, it's one of the 6 things that I think should be part of a policy to make us more competitive. And to me, there's just lots to do there.
Yeah.
Okay. Thank you very much to both of us. I mean, this was really rich, enthusiastic, passionate, and I suppose that our audience has appreciated that. So for our audience, you will receive a follow-up email that includes a survey and link to the recording. And we will broadcast another webinar on February 17 on connecting Canadian farmers to Southeast Asia markets now in the future. And of course, you can register online at www.policyschool.ca/webinars. Thank you very much, and bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye. Thank you.
Thank you.